Growing up, my sister and I always had a close relationship. She was 5 years older than me and, in many ways, felt more like a second mom when I was little. She was the kind of person who was always laughing, always joking, and always the center of attention in any room she walked into. I idolized her as a kid, but as we got older, the cracks in her seemingly perfect personality started to show. When my sister was 18, she got pregnant. It was a huge shock to everyone in the family. My parents, who are generally very liberal, were disappointed but tried to be supportive. They had always encouraged both of us to focus on our education, explore the world, and only settle down when we were ready. But when she got pregnant, things took a drastic turn. My parents, along with her boyfriend's conservative parents, insisted that the two of them get married. It was like they jumped into damage control mode, thinking a wedding would make everything better. My sister didn't resist much. She seemed excited about the idea of being a wife and mom. She wanted the whole, picture-perfect, family life. Fast forward 11 years, and my sister now has 5 kids, an 11-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And, as of Christmas this year, I found out she's pregnant again. Her life is chaos. I cannot overstate that enough. Every family dinner or gathering revolves around her and her children, either directly or indirectly, because they're just that overwhelming. Her kids are wild, loud, and completely undisciplined. I honestly don't know how she manages to stay sane, if she even is. But the thing is, she complains constantly. And when I say constantly, I mean constantly. Every single time we see her, the conversation eventually turns into a long list of grievances about her life. She complains about her husband, who works a low-paying job and is rarely home, which she interprets as him not caring about her or the kids. She complains about how she never has time for herself, how no one will babysit her kids so she can get a break, how she's tired all the time, how she feels unattractive, how her body is ruined from pregnancies, how she can't afford to fix her stomach because abdominal surgery is expensive. The list goes on. I have tried, really tried, to be understanding and supportive. I know that being a mom is hard, especially when you have so many kids. But I can't help but feel frustrated because, at the end of the day, my sister made all of these choices. She didn't have to get married at 18. She didn't have to keep having more children when she and her husband were already struggling to make ends meet. She didn't have to settle for a life that makes her so miserable. Our parents made sure we had access to birth control and all the information we needed to avoid unplanned pregnancies. She even had the option of getting an abortion with her first pregnancy, but she refused because she wanted to have the baby. This Christmas, everything came to a head. We were at my parents' house for our usual family gathering, and my sister started in on one of her trademark rants. This time, she was upset because she couldn't afford to buy her kids all the gifts they wanted, and she felt guilty seeing them disappointed. Then she spiraled into complaining about how she never has time for herself, how no one helps her, how hard her life is, and how unfair it all feels. It was the same routine we've heard 100 times before. I don't know what came over me, but I finally snapped. I looked at her and said, "Can you just shut up for once? I'm so tired of hearing you complain about problems you created for yourself." The room went silent. She stared at me like I had slapped her. Then, she started going off about how I don't understand her struggles because I have a college degree, a stable job, and no kids. She said it must be so nice to go to the gym, have time to myself, and do whatever I want whenever I want, while she's stuck at home drowning in responsibilities. That's when I said it. I told her, point blank, "You're in this position because you're a complete moron. Nobody feels sorry for you." My brother, who has been equally frustrated with her antics, started laughing. My parents didn't say much. They've always been the type to avoid confrontation, but I know for a fact they've been just as annoyed with her constant complaining. They've even vented to me privately about how exhausting it is to listen to her. My sister, on the other hand, was livid. She stormed out with her kids, and later that night, she started posting vague, passive-aggressive messages on Facebook about how society hates mothers, and how it's hard when even your family doesn't care about you. She's been making TikToks about how she feels unsupported and abandoned, using sad music and captions like, "Where's my village?" and "Mothers deserve better." Then, just when I thought things couldn't get any more ridiculous, she dropped the bombshell that she's pregnant again. I don't even have words for how absurd this situation is. She can barely handle the 5 kids she already has, and now she's bringing another one into the mix. It's like she's in some kind of self-destructive cycle, and instead of taking responsibility or making changes, she just doubles down and expects everyone else to pick up the pieces. I've decided to block her on social media and ignore her as much as possible. I can't deal with the drama anymore. I know she thinks I'm a horrible person for what I said, but honestly, I don't regret it. Someone needed to say it. Maybe it makes me an asshole, but at least I'm an honest one. Update 1. After blocking my sister on social media, I have to admit, life felt a little lighter. No more scrolling through her melodramatic Facebook posts or cringing at her overly emotional TikToks. It was like a constant, nagging headache had finally subsided. I knew it was probably temporary, but I was savoring the peace while it lasted. My parents kept me vaguely updated on her antics, and my brother occasionally dropped sarcastic comments about her latest drama, but for the most part, I was blissfully detached from her chaos. Then, one afternoon, out of nowhere, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. To my surprise, it was my sister's husband. Let me preface this by saying we've never been close. I could count on one hand the number of real conversations we've had over the years, and even those were mostly awkward small talk during family gatherings. So to hear his voice on the other end of the line was unexpected, to say the least. He sounded stressed, no, desperate. There was a tension in his voice that immediately put me on edge. He asked me if I could meet him in person. At first, I was skeptical. Why me? What could he possibly need from me? I was tempted to decline, but something about the way he asked made me hesitate. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We settled on a small cafe not far from my apartment. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a corner table, staring blankly into a cup of coffee. He looked awful. His hair was disheveled, his eyes were bloodshot, and there was a weariness about him that I hadn't noticed before. This wasn't the slightly goofy, aloof guy who cracked lame jokes at Thanksgiving. This was someone at the end of his rope. I sat down, and for a moment, we just sat there in silence. He fidgeted with his coffee cup, avoiding eye contact. I could tell he was working up to something, so I waited. Finally, he took a deep breath and started talking. And when I say he started talking, I mean he unloaded. The first thing he admitted was that he hasn't actually been working late all those nights he's been missing from home. He's been staying out deliberately, sitting in his car, wandering around aimlessly, or finding excuses to linger at work longer than necessary, because he can't stand being at home. He said their marriage has been falling apart for years, and the only reason he hasn't left is because of the kids. But even that's become unbearable. He said he feels like he's suffocating under the weight of their life together. Then he dropped a bombshell I never saw coming. He admitted that when my sister got pregnant at 18, he didn't want to marry her. He was scared, unsure, and honestly didn't feel ready to commit to her or a baby. But both sets of parents pressured him into doing the right thing, and he caved. He's been miserable ever since. He said he doesn't even recognize the person he's become because all he's done for the past 11 years is try to keep his head above water in a situation he never wanted to be in. But the kicker. The thing that made my stomach drop. He confessed that he's not even sure if the youngest 2 kids are his. I swear, I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I just sat there, stunned, as he continued talking. He said there have been rumors, whispers from friends, things he's overheard, that have planted seeds of doubt in his mind. He mentioned how my sister has been distant and secretive at times, especially around the time the younger kids were conceived. But he's been too afraid to confront her because he doesn't know what it would mean for their family if his suspicions turned out to be true. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't just your run-of-the-mill marital problems. This was a full-blown disaster. It suddenly made sense why he was so desperate to talk to someone. He said he's been carrying this burden for years, and he doesn't know who to turn to. He can't talk to my sister about it, he can't go to his family because they're too enmeshed in the perfect family narrative, and he can't even face the possibility of a DNA test because it might confirm his worst fears. When I asked him why he was telling me all of this, he looked at me with this mix of shame and desperation and said, "Because you're the only one who tells her the truth." She won't listen to anyone else. I left that meeting completely shaken. I couldn't stop thinking about everything he had said. The idea that my sister might have been unfaithful, that her husband might not even be the father of all her kids, that their entire marriage was built on a foundation of pressure and resentment, it was almost too much to process. I had always thought of her life as chaotic, sure, but this was something else entirely. This was a ticking time bomb. I don't know what to do with this information. Part of me feels like I should just stay out of it, let them sort out their own mess. But another part of me wonders if I owe it to her, or to her kids, to say something. After all, if what her husband suspects is true, the fallout could be catastrophic. And if it isn't true, they're still living in a situation that's clearly toxic for everyone involved. Update 2. Fast forward a few weeks, and everything has gone from bad to worse in ways I could have never imagined. It all started when my sister's husband decided to take matters into his own hands. After years of doubts and quiet suspicions, he secretly ordered DNA tests for the youngest 3 kids. I honestly didn't think he'd go through with it. He seemed so paralyzed by fear when we met at the cafe, but I guess desperation pushed him over the edge. When the results came back, they confirmed his worst fears. 2 of the 3 youngest children were not biologically his. I cannot even fathom what must have been going through his mind when he opened those results. From the outside, he's always come across as a passive, conflict-avoidant guy who keeps his head down and just tries to survive. But this time, something snapped. He decided he couldn't live with the lies anymore, and he confronted my sister. The confrontation was nothing short of catastrophic. According to my parents, who heard about it from a neighbor because, yes, the drama literally spilled into the street, it was an all-out screaming match. My sister accused him of betrayal, saying that secretly testing the kids' DNA was a violation of her privacy and an unforgivable act of distrust. She screamed that he was a horrible father and claimed that, regardless of biology, he should have been willing to accept all of the kids as his own. Her husband didn't hold back, though. He threw years of resentment and bitterness right back in her face. He told her how trapped he's felt since they got married, how he regrets caving to their parents' pressure, and how he spent over a decade sacrificing his happiness for a family that wasn't even entirely his. He demanded answers: when did the affairs happen, and with whom? My sister, being my sister, refused to take any responsibility. She deflected, accused him of being controlling, and played the victim card for all it was worth. Things escalated so badly that their neighbors called the police. By the time the cops arrived, the fight had spilled onto their front lawn, with my sister screaming at the top of her lungs and her husband furiously packing bags into his car. From what I've heard, the police managed to calm them down without pressing charges, but the damage was already done. By the end of the night, her husband had left the house and gone to stay with a friend. Within days, he filed for divorce. Now, here's where things really started to unravel. As part of the divorce proceedings, her husband is demanding custody of the 3 children who are biologically his. He wants to ensure their lives are as stable as possible, which, in his mind, means keeping them away from my sister's chaos. He's also refusing to pay child support for the 2 kids who aren't his, arguing that he shouldn't be financially responsible for children he didn't father. It's a legal and emotional mess, and it's clear that this is going to be an ugly, drawn-out battle. My sister, predictably, is spiraling. She's been plastering her social media with post after post about how she's been betrayed by the people she trusted the most. She paints herself as a martyr, a devoted mother who's been abandoned by a selfish, vindictive husband. Every post is more dramatic than the last: photos of her crying, captions about how she's losing everything because men are incapable of unconditional love, and vague threats about how karma will come for those who wronged her. At first, some of her friends and followers seemed sympathetic, leaving comments like, "Stay strong, mama," and "You deserve better." But as the weeks went on, her story started to fall apart. People in our small community talk, and word about the DNA test spread fast. It didn't take long for her audience to realize that the betrayal she keeps referencing was actually her husband finding out she cheated multiple times and lied to him about the paternity of their children. The supportive comments have dwindled, replaced by silence, or worse, pointed questions that she refuses to answer. As for my family, the fallout has been just as explosive. My parents, who have always tried to stay neutral in her drama, have finally reached their breaking point. For years, they've bent over backward to help her, babysitting her kids, lending her money, and trying to be her emotional support system. But this latest scandal has pushed them past their limits. They sat her down and told her, in no uncertain terms, that they would no longer babysit or provide financial support unless she agrees to make some serious changes in her life. They want her to start therapy, find a job, and take concrete steps to stabilize her situation for the sake of her children. My sister, of course, did not take this well. She accused my parents of abandoning her in her time of need. She said they were choosing sides and punishing her for being honest about her struggles. She even tried to guilt-trip them by saying they were turning their backs on their grandchildren. But my parents held firm, which is shocking considering how much they've enabled her in the past. I think they've finally realized that continuing to support her without boundaries is only enabling her destructive behavior. Now, my sister is even more isolated. Her husband has moved out and is building a legal case against her. My parents have drawn a line in the sand. Even her social media following has turned on her, with people either unfollowing her or outright calling her out in the comments. She's burning bridges left and right, and instead of taking responsibility, she's doubling down on her victim narrative. Update 3. After months of radio silence, the chaos surrounding my sister had faded into the background of my life. I won't lie, it was a relief not to be constantly inundated with her melodrama. I had moved on, focusing on my own life and letting her work through her mess in whatever way she chose. My parents mentioned her occasionally, mostly in passing, but even they had pulled back after setting their boundaries. It was almost as though we were all waiting for the next explosion, bracing ourselves for when her world would inevitably implode again. But then, completely out of the blue, she showed up at my parents' house one Sunday afternoon. I wasn't planning to be there, but my mom had invited me over for dinner, and I figured it would just be a quiet evening. When I walked into the house, I was completely unprepared for what I saw. There she was, standing in the living room with all 5 kids in tow. And she looked different. Not just physically, though that was striking enough. Her hair was neatly styled, her clothes were clean and ironed, and she had this calm, composed expression that I hadn't seen in years. But it wasn't just her appearance. There was something in her demeanor, a quiet strength that I couldn't quite place. She seemed grounded, purposeful, even serene. The kids were sitting on the couch, playing quietly with toys they'd brought along. I did a double take. These were the same kids who used to treat family gatherings like a free-for-all demolition derby. Yet here they were, calm, focused, and, dare I say, well-behaved. My parents looked equally stunned, their expressions a mix of cautious optimism and disbelief. We sat down for dinner, and that's when she started to tell us what had been going on. After her husband left and the DNA tests came out, everything in her life came crashing down. The initial fallout was as catastrophic as I'd expected, friends distancing themselves, social media turning against her, and the reality of raising 5 kids alone hitting her like a freight train. She described it as hitting rock bottom in every possible way, emotionally, financially, socially. She admitted there were days she didn't think she could get through, days when she wanted to give up entirely. But somewhere in the depths of that darkness, she made a decision. She realized that no one was going to come in and fix her life for her, not her parents, not her husband, not her siblings, and not the internet strangers who had once offered her empty words of encouragement. If she wanted her life to change, she had to be the one to change it. She had to be the one to save herself and, more importantly, her kids. Her first step was therapy. She started seeing a counselor weekly, and she didn't hold back. She said it was like opening a floodgate, years of unresolved trauma, guilt, and resentment came pouring out. She began to unpack the choices she'd made and the patterns she'd fallen into, and for the first time, she confronted her own role in the chaos that had become her life. Therapy wasn't easy, she said, but it was necessary. She didn't stop there. Recognizing that her children were just as affected by the turmoil, she enrolled her oldest in counseling as well. The 11-year-old had been struggling the most, acting out in ways that mirrored the instability at home. But with therapy, she began to see changes, small at first, but significant enough to give her hope. She also joined a local mom support group, a community of women who were dealing with their own struggles but offered each other encouragement and accountability. One of the biggest surprises was when she signed up for parenting classes. She admitted that she'd been overwhelmed and unprepared from the very beginning, relying on instinct and guesswork to raise her kids. The classes taught her strategies for managing behavior, setting boundaries, and creating routines, things that had once seemed impossible to implement in her chaotic household. Slowly but surely, she started to see a shift. On top of all that, she got a part-time job at a nearby daycare. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't pay much, but it was a start. It gave her a sense of purpose and routine, and it also helped her connect with other parents and professionals who offered her guidance and support. "It's not much," she said, "but it's a step in the right direction." Hearing her speak, I was floored. This wasn't the sister I had grown used to, the one who wallowed in self-pity and blamed everyone else for her problems. This was someone who had taken a hard look at her life and decided to fight for it. The way she spoke about her journey was raw and honest. There was no sugarcoating, no self-aggrandizing. She didn't paint herself as a hero, but as someone who had made mistakes and was finally learning how to take accountability for them. The most incredible part was seeing how it all translated into her kids. They were still kids, of course, lively, energetic, and sometimes loud, but there was a noticeable difference in their behavior. She'd implemented a structured routine at home, complete with clear rules and consequences. She'd also started a reward system to encourage good behavior, which the kids seemed to respond to surprisingly well. The oldest, who had once been defiant and angry, was now helping out with the younger ones. Even the toddlers, who used to wreak havoc everywhere they went, were calmer and more manageable. My parents, who had been so hesitant to trust her transformation, were visibly moved. They listened intently as she shared her story, occasionally nodding and exchanging glances. After dinner, my mom pulled me aside and said, "For the first time in years, I feel proud of her." Hearing those words from my mom, a woman who had spent the last decade quietly despairing over my sister's choices, was nothing short of a miracle. As for me, I found myself re-evaluating everything I thought I knew about her. I won't pretend that all the hurt and frustration I'd felt over the years just disappeared overnight. There's a lot of history between us, and rebuilding our relationship will take time. But for the first time in a long time, I could see the person she used to be, the sister I had looked up to when we were kids, the one who had once been full of life and potential. The biggest surprise came a few weeks later. She called me out of the blue, and for a moment, I was hesitant to pick up. When I did, her voice was steady but emotional. She told me she wanted to thank me. She said that what I said to her at Christmas, the words I thought had burned every bridge between us, had been the wake-up call she didn't know she needed. It hurt, she admitted, but it made me realize I couldn't keep living the way I was. I was speechless. All I could manage was to tell her I was proud of her, and I meant it. Life isn't perfect for her or her kids, but it's better. She's better. She's still in therapy, still working her part-time job, and still showing up every day to be the mom her kids deserve. Watching her transformation has been nothing short of inspiring, and it's given me a sense of hope I never thought I'd feel about our family. This journey has been messy, painful, and full of twists I never saw coming. But seeing my sister fight for herself and her children has reminded me that even in the darkest moments, change is possible. For the first time in years, I feel like our family has a future worth looking forward to.